is pretty scary. I read it twice, and it's like, really? And it was a well-done study.
And in the Jupiter study, what we discovered was that in the statin arm of the study, after 2 years, the total number of cardiovascular deaths was 12. This is a study of thousands of people. In the placebo arm of the study, the total number of cardiovascular deaths was 12. There was no difference. The only difference they found was actually there was less people in the statin arm who died of cancer.
Prepare to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
I'm just waiting for my screen to change. I hit the wrong damn button. This is why I shouldn't be producing my own shows. Welcome back to another episode of Superhuman Radio. We have a really good episode. I say we have a really good episode every day. And I really do mean it. And I mean it about today's show as well, because we're going to be joined by a guy who I consider a friend of the show now, Dr. Brad Schoenfeld. And we're going to be talking about, do you really need to train to failure to see increases in strength and muscle mass? This has been a discussion that has been had in gyms around the world for decades now. And we're going to get to the bottom of it in just a minute. Before we do that, we have to thank our title sponsor, and that's Legendary Foods. Please try one of their new tasty pastries. And if you get to try one, please try the red velvet cake one. It's amazing. 20 grams of high leucine protein, 5 net carbs, less than a gram of sugar. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary. Use the code SHR10. Now, if you're too cheap to spring for one, in the words of Tootie, who used to own Tootie's Bar, where Jackie Gleason used to bartend, you can win one. We give away free boxes of the tasty pastry every day during the commercial break. If you listen for the secret word and email it to me at onair@superhumanradio.net, you're entered to win. So pay attention during the commercial breaks, and you may be one of the proud owners of a box of tasty pastries. And now, without further delay, get my guest here and put up there we go, producing the show and talking to, I just want to put this out there right now. We're talking today to the GOAT of muscle building scientific research, Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, the greatest of all times. And I'm not saying that lightly. I really do feel that way about you, because you're by far the most critical thinking guy who writes science in this area where we all want to know, how are my efforts best spent? Your research is always about the truth and not any kind of biases. So I commend you on that. Welcome back to the show, Brad. How you doing?
It's my pleasure, Carl.
So this is interesting. So you guys published a study, and you looked at the role of failure in the supercompensation effect of training. Why this study? Is it just because it's been discussed forever and nobody has a real answer?
Yeah, first to clarify, it wasn't a study per se. It was a meta-analysis, which basically is a study of studies. So we pooled the data from previously published studies, or all previous published studies, on the topic of training to failure versus not training to failure. And the reason is that it's probably one of, if not the most, but certainly one of the most controversial topics in the field. And when there's a controversial topic, you want to do your best to try to clarify what the evidence really shows.
Now, going into this, this is called a review or a meta-analysis. Correct me.
It's a systematic. So you do a systematic review, and the meta-analysis is actually taking the data and then statistically analyzing them. So it's a combination. So first you need to review the studies. The systematic review is a systematic way of figuring out which studies meet the inclusion-exclusion criteria. And once you have assembled all the studies, then you carry out what we call a meta-analysis, which is basically you're making one big study out of a lot of smaller studies. and then you assess what the results are and report on them.
Okay. Before you endeavored this project, did you already have an opinion?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, I'll start off by saying that I come from I'm a bro at heart. So I come from the era back in the 90s when I really started getting seriously into training and following the bodybuilding routines of my favorite bodybuilders. And just in general, the gym lore is that you need to train hard, and it's either train hard or go home type of attitude. And not only would when I first was doing this, train to failure, but you do drop sets, you do forced reps. So yeah, I came from that school. Now, looking as I've become an educator researcher, I'd seen some of the more recent evidence, which started to point and lead me to think maybe that wasn't as true as I had thought as a bro, that the gym lore did not actually map out. And I had a feeling that we were going to find it probably was not as big a factor as had been thought. I was not prepared necessarily to say that it was virtually no factor, is kind of what we found in the study, with some caveats.
Was Lee Haney really the first pro to kind of exemplify this? His motto was stimulate, don't annihilate. People used to joke that, Lee used very, very light weight. He focused on the mind-muscle connection. He was a 6 or 7-time Mr. Olympia. So he had the body and he had the strength, but he was training differently. And I don't think his training was as sexy as Arnold and Ed Corney, going to collapsing in the squats. And it was like, oh, that's so heroic. Oh, there's Lee Haney. Yeah, there's Lee Haney. But he was winning competitions. Was he like the first one to kind of carve this niche?
I hadn't thought about it, but certainly the stimulate, don't annihilate is attributable to him. And I would guess, yeah, I never trained with Lee Haney, so I don't know exactly what he did. It's always sometimes difficult to know what people do versus what they say. Sometimes you see film of them and you can make better judgments, as you did like with pumping iron, and Dorian Yates certainly has a lot of film of him training. But in a lot of others, they might not want people knowing what they're doing, the secrecy. But yeah, long story short, I would say probably he would be someone who would embody that. Okay,
so how did you determine which would be in the end result analysis? What studies would actually be selected?
Yeah, so in a systematic review meta-analysis, you're going to have what's called inclusion-exclusion criteria. And it's been a little while since I went through this. It was published now a little while ago, so it's probably been several months, 4 or 5 months, since I actually looked it over. But just from what I recall, I mean, it was, well, certainly it was one study, one group in the study had to train to failure versus another group that didn't train to failure. Now, it was only in healthy individuals, adults. We didn't include children in there.
They were young athletes, right? They weren't no old guys in it, right?
No, there were age was there was, I think, a couple of studies that did include older. Most of them were younger. Right. Most of the majority of them were untrained. So we then sub-analyzed. So what you do is you have these inclusions. So we didn't have like people that had knee injuries or certain injuries that would exclude. Obviously, that would be a confounding issue. But we were able then to do what's called a sub-analysis. So long story short, here's what we found. Within that, the overall analysis, when you pooled all the studies with untrained subjects versus trained subjects, with men and women, with older, younger, and all these things pooled as one study, no differences in strength and no differences in hypertrophy. We then did various what's called sub-analyses. So we would try to tease out whether older versus younger. So you can then stratify the results so that you're analyzing just the older and just the younger and seeing if that had an effect. It didn't. We looked at volume, and actually with volume, it was interesting. For strength, there was no differences when volume was not a factor, but when volume was equated, meaning that in some studies you were able to do more sets to catch up the volume, which you're not able to do. If you're training to failure, your volume load is going to be less.
Right.
The amount of weight you're going to use, so that you can do additional sets to make up for that.
Right.
So it was shown that the strength favored non-failure training when the volume was not equated. And the one variable that had an effect on hypertrophy in favor of failure training was trained versus untrained. So what we found was, when we stratified just the studies that did trained subjects, there was an effect that training to failure had a positive effect. Now, a couple things. Number one, the effect was relatively modest.
Right.
It's called an effect size, and the effect size was what we would classify as small to trivial to small. So it's not a big effect, but it was statistically significant, which basically just means it wasn't due to chance.
Right.
We'd have the ability. With that said, I'd also point out, though, that there weren't that many studies that looked at training to failure in resistance trained subjects. So it actually was somewhat skewed. The ability to draw conclusions wasn't great, and we had to exclude a study. So one of our exclusion criteria was they couldn't have. We did not consider studies that had both resistance training combined with aerobic training. So if the studies had an aerobic training component, we excluded them. And our thinking was, and we did this before we started analyzing before we actually did the search. The thought is that there's evidence that it can have negative effects, or in untrained subjects, it actually can have positive effects.
Yeah.
And in trained subjects, it may have negative effects. Anyway, we felt this could skew the results.
Sure.
But there was one study in trained subjects that had a sprint training component and it actually showed a positive effect of not training to failure. If we had have included that in the study, there would have been no effect.
Right.
And a study came out subsequently after we published the study, so we weren't able to include it. But it, again, in trained subjects, showed no effect of failure training. So I'd be skeptical of that finding, just to say that it really probably doesn't have much credence in that context.
So talk about so you said that the strength in the non-fail group seemed to improve to a greater degree than the fail group. I get that right? Did you say that?
When volume was equated. So
okay.
Unless they would do more sets to make up for the lack of the volume, that was not done.
What is the role of peripheral and central nervous system in adaptation to training? And is that why that worked out that way, you think?
I'm not clear of the question. Can you?
So we know that if you go to failure too frequently, right, the nervous system is more taxed than the musculature as well. And the nervous system doesn't seem to bounce back as quickly as maybe muscle does. So do you think that going to failure may hinder those who are chasing strength exclusively because they're taxing their nervous system to such a great degree?
Yeah, it very well could be. And it also then, to your point, would seemingly impair recovery ability between sessions. So not only between the sets, but if you're going to challenge the neuromuscular system extremely highly, if you have extreme taxation of the neuromuscular system, it's not well studied, but conceivably you're not going to be able then to come back in the next session, depending upon how much recovery days it would seemingly take longer to recover. And if you're going to then have, let's say, a training session within 48 hours, are you then compromised, particularly if you're training with somewhat heavier loads? Those are all factors we're not really clear of, but certainly from a logical standpoint, I would say that would be one suggestion as to what the issue is. And also just that there does seem to be some effect of volume load on strength as well. Bottom line is, I would say with good conviction that you do not need, from the evidence that we have, that you don't need to train to failure for maximizing strength-related goals. Although I would say, again, if you're a power lifter, you probably would benefit doing 1RMs every now and then, which is basically to failure. So taking a set to your 1RM periodically would be beneficial if your goal is to maximize your 1RM response, then that would seem to be a beneficial strategy. Now, hypertrophy, like I said, is, I think, I actually wrote a blog post about this, so people can go to my blog, which is lookgreatnaked.com. And I have a blog post that I wrote a few weeks ago, a month or so ago. And I talked about some of the things that really, when you look at a research study, there's a lot that we don't get. So research is always going to have gaps in the literature. And you have to understand, to be a true evidence-based practitioner, you need to understand the research, and you also need to understand the gaps within the research, so that basically the holes, where, every study is a piece in a puzzle. And when you get a group of studies, you're going to say there are pieces in that puzzle that are not yet filled in. We have no studies that have been carried out in very high level bodybuilders and just athletes in general. Mm-hmm. I would not discount the fact that there may be a benefit to someone who is very close to his genetic ceiling in needing to go to failure occasionally to really challenge the muscle, basically to challenge it beyond its capacity to enhance results. Another really important caveat is that in all the studies that to date that have been looked at, they either had so they were multi-level, I think multi-set studies. I think every one, I'm not sure whether there may have been one or two single sets, like a HIIT, high intensity training, Mike Mentzer style. Maybe there was one study or something, but the vast majority were multi-set studies where every set was taken to failure versus every set not taken to failure. Well, that's not necessarily the way training works. It's not a binary choice.
Right.
So I certainly in my training and when I consult with bodybuilders, some sets are taken to failure and some sets aren't. And the extent of that can be manipulated over a multitude of ways, almost, I don't want to say endless, but many different strategies for how to integrate that into a routine. There's also the issue of heavy weights versus light weights. There seems to be a greater need to train is closer to failure with lighter loads.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So again, there's really a lot that we still do not know about the topic. And I think we can have draw broad conclusions that generally speaking, it's not going to make a huge difference training to failure versus not training to failure. And I think that has very important effects for the general public that, some people, it might, they felt they needed to train to failure, they might demotivate them.
Yes.
To training. But I also don't think we can unequivocally say that training to failure is not needed if your goal is to maximize results, particularly when I say results, hypertrophic results. And I think the jury is still out on that, but maybe it's just the bro in me that wants that to be true. But I think that is something. And I mean, certainly that was my confirmation bias. I'm certainly open to changing my opinion there too. But certainly we don't have the evidence research-wise to say one way or another, because there have been no true research that has studied that, and in particular in various configurations. Let's say just training the last set to failure. And again, when we talked earlier, you talk about the negative effects, let's say in the neuromuscular system for recovery. There's a big difference between just doing the last set to failure on your recovery abilities than just doing occasional sets to failure. And by the way, there's a big difference between training with, let's say, a multi-joint structural exercise like the squat to failure versus doing a leg extension to failure. Or let's say a bent over row, or let's say a military press versus a lateral raise to failure. So it's going to be much less taxing on the neuromuscular system to do the single joint exercise, particularly if you can do it in a machine where the degrees of freedom are limited. So these are all, again, things that need to be taken into account. And it's not a binary choice. One of the things that I'm really big on as an educator is trying to make people aware of not thinking in binary terms. It's not necessarily an either or. There are lots of variations, and those haven't been studied. So,
the other thing that I think about when I talk about failure is that the failure is very, very subjective. What you think failure is and what I think failure is very, very different. So if you take the average newbie, they don't realize their strength. They can't really activate the nervous system. They can't get the noise out of their head. They're afraid. And Arthur Jones did this with Menster, maybe, or with another guy. Who was the guy that they whittled him down and then built him back up again? You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I do. It wasn't Boyer Co. It was the name is.
It'll come to me. It'll come to me probably during the commercial break. But you know, his big complaint about people that he was training was they think they're going to failure, but they're not, and he would push them. And what about the fact that failure means a lot of different things to a lot of different people? Some people are going to failure that really probably have another 2 reps, but they just don't want to go there.
Yeah, so you could say volitional failure versus true failure, and sometimes they're different. Volitional would just be where someone says, I've had enough and I quit. Right. If you put a gun to someone's head and say, you know what, if you don't keep going, I'm going to blow your brains out, usually they're going to get another rep. Now, it's I think more the case as the weights start becoming lighter, where the fatigue is more peripheral versus central. Like if you're doing a 2RM, 3RM, you're stuck. If that weight is stuck to you and you have a gun to you, look, I just can't get another. Where the fatigue is more peripheral, where it's based upon lactic acid buildup peripherally in the muscles, you probably can squeeze out another rep or 2 or more. And yeah, and that is going to be specific to the individual, their own pain tolerance, etc., and their desire, their motivation to get certain results. Someone who's highly motivated to win a competition or to look good in their swimsuit for a party they're going to could be different than someone who is just saying, yeah, I want to get some results. But
see, and so this was the basis. I sent you a question years ago, and I don't think I really, it wasn't well developed in my mind. And I asked you if you thought that perceived exertion and perceived exhaustion could influence strength and hypertrophy, the response. And my thinking was like, if we know that the response to muscle to get stronger, maybe bigger, but to get stronger for sure, is this upregulation, this supercompensation of a challenge that the body perceives we need to be prepared next time. And from an evolutionary perspective, all the machinery kicks in to better prepare you to do something next time. And if you do that and you're fully rested and you feel great, bang, and the top weight that you handle is X, and you get that neuromuscular feedback that was required for the body to go, okay, let's get stronger. And then the next time you're exhausted and you undergo these same steps, but the weight that you move is as far as gravity is concerned, less than X, but the body still perceives it as the same level of intensity as when you were well rested. And I wonder if the neuromuscular adaptation and supercompensation is the same. And if that's true, then we should all be exhausted when we're training and just use weight that we can handle.
Yeah, and I can't answer your question scientifically because there's been no study that, and it would be extremely difficult to try to look at that. But here's something we do know is that muscle development is predicated on the tension in a muscle. The primary driver of hypertrophy, the primary driver, is mechanical stress. And basically the body converts mechanical signals into chemical signals. And at least theoretically, the higher the mechanical stress, which would have at a given repetition range or loading zone, that would be based on the load that you're using. So if you're, let's say, getting a 10 RM, conceivably, I mean, you're not conceivably, you certainly are putting more mechanical stress on the muscle. If you're doing, let's say, a 400-pound squat versus a 350-pound squat, your quads are under greater mechanical stress at the 400-pound squat for 10 reps. So if you're then, let's say, going to do less weight in the next session, the mechanical stress is less, and conceivably this mechanotransduction, where you're converting the mechanical signals into chemical signals, and then there's a cascade of enzymes that carry out protein synthesis, or that lead to the carrying out of protein synthesis, muscle protein synthesis, will take over. And again, conceivably, you're not going to be able to have that same response. Now, how that plays out in practice, that's the theoretical rationale. as to why that might have an effect. Whether that actually plays out in practice, the body is so complex, and trying to use logic. Obviously, that's what a researcher is going to do. But then we try to study it in a controlled environment, and that would be an extremely difficult topic to control all the variables and try to isolate that.
We're going to take a break. The longer I do this show, the more I realize we don't know. One of my favorite sayings now, and I say this pretty ubiquitously when people post these questions, baby talk, Joel Green likes to call it. Is this good? Is this bad? And I say, like, even trying to answer that would be an insult to the complexity of the human body. So I'm not even going to go there. We're going to take a quick commercial break. If you want to pick up a fantastic book, it's called The Science and Development of Muscle Hypertrophy. You can get it at Amazon. It's actually a textbook that Brad wrote last year. In June, you released it, right? Is that when you said you lived?
2020, yep.
You can go there and you can get it and be ahead of the crowd. You can be the smartest kid on your block and the strongest. We're going to pick up on the other side of this break. We have questions. We'll work those into the show, I promise. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with more Superhuman Radio. Out as a proven strategy to facilitate better recovery. Getting to massage therapists can be difficult and expensive, especially in these times. The solution is the Meteor, a heated massage ball from Milestorm. Reduce pain and soreness and expedite recovery with the Meteor's research-backed vibration settings and therapeutic heat. It's convenient for travel and works on any body part. Go to shrnetwork.biz/Meteor and use code SHR15 for 15% off and free shipping if you buy 2 or more. Start recovering better today. Horsepower. Being superhuman means being conscientious about the choices we make. White Oak Pastures is superhuman when it comes to raising livestock. They're committed to animal welfare, land regeneration, and rural revival. They responsibly manage the entire process from the pasture to your doorstep. High-quality, pasture-raised, great-tasting meat from a farm you can trust. Full nose-to-tail selections. They even have options for your pet. Go to shrnetwork.biz/White Oak and use code SHR20 to save 20% off your entire first order.
New Mass Pro Synthogen X2 just upped its own legendary game. To distance itself even further from the rest of the pack, Synthogen X2 now has double the key active ingredients. If you've ever wondered what steroid-like recovery feels like, Synthogen X2 delivers. See why others compare it favorably to powerful bodybuilding drugs at synthogen.com. Mass Pro Synthogen. When you train with it, you'll gain with it.
You're listening to the Superhuman Channel. We're ripped and we're ready.
Welcome back. We actually have a slide that Natalie put up for us that shows the methodology and the conclusions behind the research. If you want to pause your video, if you're watching, you can read it. This is what we were discussing previously in the discussion. So we're going to come back to Dr. Schoenfeld and myself and our beautiful mugs, 2 old guys from New York. You're a lot younger than me, I know, but I like to, it's funny. I never thought of myself being in my 60s, but it's not so bad. I got to be honest with you. It's pretty good. So we have a couple questions. I want to get to these, and then I've got some more questions for you. So let's see. We have the first question comes from Robert Thompson. He wants to ask about creatine monohydrate. Do you have an opinion on creatine monohydrate?
Yeah, but what's the question?
He wants to know creatine monohydrate. Is it effective? I eat meat and fish. So does he need to supplement with it? I guess.
Again, the question. So it's a loaded question because effective for what? If the question is as to strength and hypertrophy, potentially it is. So it's one of the it is the most studied muscle building supplement, strength building supplement. And really one of the only ones. I'm not, as those who know about me know, that I'm not a huge fan of supplements in general, and that most of them really don't work. I'm sorry to any sponsors you may have on this, but yeah. I can only give my opinion.
That's your opinion. That's effective.
The vast majority have not been shown to be effective. Now, with that, this is for muscle building. Now, there's certainly for other other goals, there's some very effective supplements, but muscle building supplements in general, just generally not effective. With that said, creatine generally is, but number one, about a third of those who take creatine are non-responders. They don't respond. Usually it is the meat eaters. So if you're eating a lot of meat, because creatine is found in meat, and thus usually your stores are going to be tapped out. The reason that creatine supplementation can work is because creatine stores are low. So creatine, I don't know how much we get into the weeds here, but creatine is it basically regenerates your ATP stores. So when you're what's called the phosphagen system, it allows for regeneration of this anaerobic capacity that you have, and you can get an extra rep or two out. Also, it hydrates the cell, so it's thought that it can enhance the water within the cell, which can make the muscle look fuller. So again, about a third do not respond, and it's not, so it does work. Now, some people are going to get better results than others. Again, it probably is going to be mostly due to what your initial creatine levels are. It tends to work better for vegans, and to some extent vegetarians.
Yeah, because they're starving of creatine. They're not getting creatine.
They don't get it in their diets, correct. Yeah. And what I would say is that you can give it a shot and see if it works. If it does, great. It's pretty easy to see.
Do you know anything about Doug Brignoli?
I know, I've never met him, but I respect him. Yeah, he was a very good bodybuilder back in the day, and someone that I've had conversations with online, and someone I respect.
The question is the Brignoli method to failure, but I think that it doesn't matter whose method you're using. The science shows that failure or not failure may beget similar results, and whether or not failure is required. So, but this is a great question.
And by the way, I don't know Doug's method, so I don't know of his method. I just have spoken to him on some of his ideas about training in general, and find him to be a thoughtful, science-based bodybuilder.
Yeah, he's a great guy. So Bear says, so what is true failure? And this is the reason I want to get to this question, is because I remember watching a documentary, and I think it was called The Perfect Human Diet. And they had a guy in a lab, and they had him do leg extension, one leg extension to failure. And then they put this magnetic halo on his head when he said he couldn't do any more, and he was able to do 3 more reps. And they blocked some brain region that is protective, keeps you from breaking stuff in your body. And so, we think we're at failure, but maybe we're not. So how do you gauge true failure?
So the definitions to true failure are somewhat different in the literature. My general definition is the inability to complete another repetition in proper form. So, you can go to failure where you're struggling, the weight's going all around. Now, I will say this too, in research. So I carry out a research study where we take them, quote unquote, to failure. But my number one job as a researcher is not to get my subjects hurt.
Yeah, right.
If I do that, I have failed as a researcher. So if there is any question, we stop. They're stopped. So again, is that how ecologically valid is that? Meaning, how much in real life to someone like Dorian Yates? Well, not necessarily. So you have to take those things with some degree of a grain of salt. But I would say this: if going to the failure that we defined didn't seem to be that much better, why would then going even past that, which would cause even more neural fatigue, have greater effects? When it would, my point here is that it would seem logically, now logically doesn't always matter, but that if there was going to be a benefit, training harder than not training harder, you should see a benefit. Then even training harder than that, is that going to show a benefit? I can't say it doesn't. So is training to Dorian Yates failure? So I will say this, a colleague of mine, another very good researcher, James Steele, has done a lot of work with this, and his definition is basically you need to actually try another rep and not be able to get that rep up.
Right.
That's his definition.
That's what I always thought failure was. Like it's hard to do by yourself if you're bench pressing, because you're going to get stapled to the bench, proving that you went to failure. But that's what I always thought failure was. And because I would love to say, oh, I failed just because my form sucks on that last rep. I'm like, oh, I'm done. But usually and that's why I have so many injuries, and I've suffered so many injuries, because I have taken everything that I could to true failure. And true failure was, to me, was like, if I didn't drop the bar, I was going to be crushed by it in a squat. Like, oh, I failed. Now I couldn't do anything else. But you know, that's the interesting thing about failure. But I think you're onto something. It is Casey Viator that we couldn't think of before. Thank you.
Casey Viator, yeah.
Yeah. But I think you're onto something here, because I think if I stop when my form becomes horrendous, and that's failure to me, I probably wouldn't have torn hamstrings, and I probably wouldn't have torn my tricep off and stuff like that.
Yeah, which is why, and again, in research, it's just not, in my opinion, it's just not, well, I shouldn't say it's not ethical, because if you're letting the subjects know that this is going to be a risk, but I personally think that's a poor risk for in a research study. And look, what I would say is I think most researchers use the method that I'm talking about. And whereas if when we start seeing the form breaking down, we stop the set.
Bam. All right, we're going to get through the rest of these questions. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back because I have more I want to talk to you about, something I read of yours recently online that fits nicely into this discussion. Faith Fitness Guy says, what are your thoughts on Lyle McDonald defining that a failure set is when it gets to 3 seconds to 10 seconds of effort to complete the rep? Have you heard anything?
I haven't, but as I said, people are entitled. There's no one definition that you could say. Everyone is entitled to their opinion as to what constitutes failure. So there's not necessarily a right or wrong. There's different, in the literature, there's different definitions.
So the next question comes from Clint CB. He says, does long-term weightlifting to failure break down or build the central nervous system? I think from the previous discussion, we really don't know that, do we?
When you talk about build the central nervous system, that's somewhat of an ambiguous statement, but it certainly, it could be either, depending upon what you're doing. So if you're overtrained, you could be breaking it down.
Yeah, but, and you could overtrain with lightweight and lots of reps. Yeah,
correct. But ultimately, consistent resistance training is going to enhance. You actually increase the development of your nervous system. So that's what I would assume he's talking about. And that would be improved, assuming you're training, you're not overdoing it.
So I've done shows on rhabdomyolysis. Dr. George Tuliatos says, do we always need rhabdomyolysis for muscle growth? In other words, muscle damage and breakdown. Before you answer this question, I just have to say something. Doctors check creatinine levels, and that's not a good indicator of rhabdo. It's not at all. In fact, it's myoglobin that they're not looking at, that they should be looking at. That is an indicator of rhabdo. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I think they're conflating. The question is conflating rhabdomyolysis with muscle damage. You can get muscle damage, and it doesn't mean you have rhabdomyolysis. So they're two very different. Now, high levels of muscle damage can lead to rhabdomyolysis. I would say this: whether muscle damage is necessary for growth is still equivocal, although I'm not sure, again, how you define how muscle damage, you kind of touched on this, but forget about rhabdomyolysis, how muscle damage is assessed. There's different ways to look at that. Creatine kinase is one, Z-line streaming. There's all different ways you can look at that, and you'd have to define that. But I would say it's probably quite difficult not to have some perturbation of the muscle tissue if you're lifting weights. If not, then you're just training really light, I shouldn't even say really light, but very far. You're not challenging the system.
Right.
So the question is whether that has additive effects on growth, and that is still to be determined. I will say this: at high levels of muscle damage, it clearly is a negative. I don't think there's much question. And certainly if you have rhabdomyolysis, that not only is it not needed for growth, that would have negative effects, because you're not going to be able to train for a while. It would be a negative.
And once people get rhabdo, they're more prone to get it again and again and again. And it's not something good to flirt with, quite frankly, because it could destroy your kidneys.
It's serious. Yeah.
Forget about your muscles. If you have kidney failure, who cares about weightlifting, right?
Correct.
So last two questions. Let's see. This one says, Chris Arp is saying tough to compare. I think when we were talking about failure and all that, the number of variables makes for an impossible comparison. Is stretching worthwhile? There's one from left field. Are you a big fan of stretching?
So my answer to questions like that will always be, and it depends.
For what?
If you need additional flexibility, stretching can be beneficial. I mean, and then will open up a whole can of worms that I don't think we want to go into, but the need for flexibility, mobility is specific to the individual. Stretching is not necessary if you have the mobility that allows you to do what you want to do in life, carry out your activities of daily living. If your flexibility is impaired to the point that it is impairing your ability to carry out activities of daily living, then stretching can be beneficial. And I will also say this, that a regimented resistance training program through a full range of motion serves as an active form of flexibility training. And thus there's been some studies have shown you can get similar benefits to static stretching with, at least in the early stages. Doesn't mean you might not, adding stretching into resistance training can get you even better results. So again, that would be, and it depends based on what your goals are.
We're going to take our last commercial break with Dr. Schoenfeld. Science and Development of Muscle Hypertrophy at Amazon.com is the book you want to buy. I'm always astonished by the number of people who spend gobs and gobs of money on supplements, but don't spend any money on learning. And guess what? When that supplement bottle is empty and you throw it away, you have to refill it. But when you learn something new, it's with you for the rest of your life. You employ it for the rest of your life. And we have too many people out there who waste so much money on supplements and don't spend a dime on learning something new. My attitude is, if I buy a book and I learn one thing from it, I read the whole book, it could be 500 pages, and I come away with one thing from it, that's a win for me, because I will employ that one thing for the rest of my life. So Science and Development of Muscle Hypertrophy at Amazon, and also you can learn more at lookgoodnaked.com.
No. It's Look Great Naked.
No, wait.
Really important.
Let me change. Yeah, you don't want to just, no, my website is Look Good Naked. His is Look Great Naked, as you can see from the difference in our physiques. But here, hold on a second. I got to change it. I got to do that. Lookgreatnaked.com. Go there and learn more. Did I spell it right? Yes. Okay. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with more of Dr. Brad Schoenfeld. You're listening to and watching Superhuman Radio. Muscle or burn fat, you'll find everything you need at Redcon One. Need help getting a good night's sleep? Try Fade Out, or the most popular pre-workout supplement on the market today, Total War. Sign up for their new Transformation Challenge and win $10,000, or shop for apparel that people at the gym will know that you are serious about your training. Need a testosterone booster that works? Check out Boomstick. Whatever you need, you'll find the best quality supplements on the market at Redcon One. Go to redcon1.com. That's REDCON, the number 1.com, or go to superhumanradio.net and click the Redcon One banner ad today. Are you ready to change the way you age? Of course you are. That's why you're here. Juvicel is a new first-of-its-kind dietary supplement that includes 10 key research-backed ingredients shown in studies to support lifespan. Things like resveratrol, fisetin, quercetin, pterostilbene, sulforaphane, turmeric, all in a single dose. You may have some of these ingredients already, but Juvicel is the first to combine them all into a single product to support your lifespan. It's vegan, non-GMO, and sustainable. Live better longer with Juvicel. Go to shrnetwork.biz/live better. Use code SHR and save 20% off today. P3OM uses a patented natural process to upgrade a well-researched probiotic strain that doubles every 20 minutes once inside your body. The patent proves this strain is proteolytic, meaning it digests protein. It's antiviral, antiretroviral. It eliminates pathogens and waste and is maintainable in the human digestive system. What it does better than any other strain is fight the bad guys, bugs like parasites, viruses, and other pathogens in your gut, and it doesn't require refrigeration. If you suffer from bloating, gas, indigestion, or you just need extra protection from viruses, aka bad bacteria, then I'd suggest trying this super single strain probiotic proven to wipe out bad bacteria. Go to bioptimizers.com/SHR to get a 10% discount coupon with code SHR10 and free shipping on all products. Or save even bigger by signing up to one of the plans to get as much as 38% off. That's bioptimizers.com/SHR.
This is the Superhuman Channel, where we use oxygen for the power of good.
Welcome back. So I'd like to put a cap on this discussion. And I hearken back to one of my favorite sayings when people ask me, what's the best diet? And we know that answer is the one that you'll stick to the longest, because consistency is the magic, not the food you're eating. You got to do it long enough to see its effect, then fine tune it and see what changes. So the best diet is the one that you'll stick to the longest. Can we now say that about training as well, thanks to this research? Can we say, hey, look, you're going to build muscle and strength no matter which way you go at it. So do what you're willing to do the longest.
Well, that's always going to depend upon what your goals are. I would say that is true for the vast majority of the population whose goals are modest, who want to gain muscle and have a good physique. If your goal is a bodybuilder or to maximize your genetic potential, then that's going to require you to, have greater scientific input into your thought processes and into your training. So yeah, I think that for the majority of people, doing a fairly minimalist routine will get them a majority of their results. It's for, I would say, to maximize, if you're at getting 80 or 90% of your results, to get to that next level, that's where really the manipulation of variables and taking a very intuitive and scientific approach, a combination of understanding your body and then using what we know through science in combination with your own expertise is how you're going to achieve that.
But isn't that the original Schoenfeld template? When you were on the show years ago and we talked about, and the way you like to train is, get the heavy movements up front, the real strenuous, the heroic stuff while your body is fresh. And then as you move on, you start hitting the higher reps, slightly less weight. And in there, you're failing here and there. Isn't that kind of like the gestalt of the best way to train?
Again, best way really depends upon who you are. So if you're time limited, you could do a very minimalist routine, Mike Menser style 2-3 day a week routine, and still get doing one set per exercise of the major muscle groups, 6-7 different exercises. You're out in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and get and have a decent physique, have a good physique. To maximize your results, that is not going to be the case. So you always have to put what someone's goals are, their abilities. You're going to look at injury. There's so many factors. The age is going to be a factor, so people don't recover as well as they get older. So lots to unpack there, and I'm always hesitant to say what an ideal routine is.
I kind of find as long as progression, is the focus, whether it's increasing reps, increasing weight, or doing things that using advanced techniques like pauses and statics and negatives, as long as progression is the ultimate goal, I kind of feel like you can continue to get better and better and better. What do you think of that statement?
Yeah, I think that is certainly a key to continued results. That the reason the body changes is because it is a novel stimulus. So basically the body is still living in the caveman era. Our genetics to that extent have not changed, and that the basic reason that the body will adapt is because of a stressor that threatens its survival, or a perceived threat to its survival. If you keep doing the same thing, if there's no progression, the body is used to that. There's no threat to its survival. It has no impetus, no reason to change. So if you do something that is more stressful, if you will, impose a stress that it is not used to on a relatively regular basis, that is how you continually and perpetually get it to evolve and adapt.
And that's I wrote down the word evolution here because I wanted to work it into the conversation, and you just did very nicely. And that's where the real interesting stuff is. From an evolutionary perspective, muscle is metabolically expensive. It doesn't really benefit the long-term goal of the species. And we can see that because we have plenty of negative regulators of muscle. Right. We don't really have any positive. We don't have anything that you say, well, if this just turns on, you're just going to grow and grow and grow. But we have lots of things that say, if this turns on, you're going to lose. And when you think about that, what we do in the gym really pushes back on every single evolutionary adaptation that we have developed. When you put on a pound of muscle, you should pat yourself on the back because you just told evolution, hey, F you, man. Look what I just did. And, we don't think of it that way, right? We think of it as, oh, yeah, my biceps, my triceps, I'm getting stronger. We don't realize when you see a 300-pound ripped to shred bodybuilder standing on stage and all you think is drugs, you're so wrong, because evolution has been pushing on that guy or that gal to keep them from even getting near there, and they're there. So it really, science should be paying more attention to what's done in the gym, because if we can push back on this primary evolutionary edict, what could we do in other areas of our body if we understood how to coax it?
Yeah, I agree completely that the evolutionary constraints are massive. Like you said, muscle mass is energetically costly. So the body, back in the caveman era, a 300-pound bodybuilder, it would be very difficult for him to catch enough food and to go out and either catch the meats and pick the berries, whatever they're going to have, to survive, to maintain that. And that, again, would be a negative survival effect. So the body does try to keep you in that range. And I think that's one of the exciting areas of science, is that if we can find either through training and or through supplements or drugs, how that might be able to be, we can overcome these things. There could be benefits. And look, I'm not talking about for bodybuilders, but certainly for wasting diseases, et cetera. And there's all sorts of aspects of life where that can be very important.
I used to communicate with Dr. Se-Jen Lee fairly regularly, but he would never come on my show. And I would ask him, I say, why don't you come on the show? But he says, because you guys are interested in building muscle for aesthetics and for, you want to win a contest. And I'm trying to keep people from wasting away and dying. And he felt that what he was doing was so much more noble. But the reality is those two things could coexist and learn from each other.
Yeah, I think when we try to start putting labels on things, it can be dangerous. But I certainly would say that curing cancer, that what I do is not curing cancer. But I mean, certainly improving someone's self-esteem is an important endeavor. So I would argue this is the other.
I would argue with you. One of the leading causes of death from cancer is cachexia, the wasting. A lot of people don't die from the cancer per se. They die from the toll of the body just literally wasting away. And a guy like you could probably show them some modalities, maybe not to build muscle, but to halt the wasting, which would give them a greater lifespan.
Yeah, actually, so I'm involved in a meta-analysis on resistance training with cancer, which is going to have some interesting, we're in the process of it now, but should have some interesting data on that soon.
One more time, he is the greatest of all time when it comes to muscle building scientific research. His book is Science and Development of Muscle Hypertrophy at Amazon.com, and his website is Look Great Naked. Mine is Look Average Naked. You don't want to go to that website. Brad, always great to see you, brother.
My pleasure, Carl.
Take care. We're going to take one quick commercial break. We'll be right back with more Superhuman Radio. Stay with me. Making sure you're able to perform and look your best. They are a leader in game-changing supplements and cosmetic products. Whether you want to increase strength, expedite recovery, facilitate soft tissue repair, or reduce deep wrinkles, TaylorMade Health has you covered. TaylorMade Health is also the home to Dr. Seed's products such as BPC, BPC Plus, and the Chill Pill. All of my listeners can now get 20% off their first order with code TRY20. That's TRY20. This code can even be used on subscription orders. Visit shrnetwork.biz/TRY20 today and use code TRY20 for 20% off your first order. Horsepower, Do you remember those delicious toaster pastries you had when you were a kid? You know, the rectangular sugar-filled snacks? Well, guess what? Legendary Foods has just made low-carb toaster pastry. This is the first of its kind, and honestly, these things are amazing. They have 3 to 4 net carb, less than 1 gram of sugar, and 9 grams of protein. You can eat them right out of the wrapper or lightly toast them. The only question is, which flavor, strawberry or brown sugar cinnamon? They're available at eatlegendary.com and Amazon. Folks, I'm pleased to announce that Pure Nootropics is now carrying the antioxidant alpha-lipoic acid in its bioidentical natural form as R-Ala. R-Ala provides protection in many areas and has even been shown to promote weight loss. Check out the interview I did on episode 2608 back in October to learn more. Our friends at Pure Nootropics have been bringing you great products and deals since 2013, and they have another one with R-Ala. Go to shrnetwork.biz/pure and use code SHR30 for a whopping 30% off. Level up. Go Pure. The power of light can be truly life-changing and an important element for every superhuman. Because of this, I want you to experience the power of award-winning Seluma light therapy. Seluma utilizes NASA research technology to improve health at the cellular level and is cleared by the FDA to effectively treat a variety of pain, muscle, and joint conditions, as well as facial wrinkles and acne. Our entire team here at Superhuman Radio uses it. Its innovative shape-taking design allows for easy placement anywhere on the body. Choose from 13 different models. For an exclusive listener discount, go to shrnetwork.biz/Seluma. That's CELLUMA. And use code SHR10 to save 10% off of one of these award-winning devices.
Move over, superheroes. This is the Superhuman Channel.
Hey, welcome back. I got a quick discussion I want to have with you guys right now. So I'm off tomorrow, because I'm actually going to be working on the new studio to get it set up for Miss Elisa Profumo, TLAT, the lovely and talented, because tomorrow is Thursday, but Friday is the second episode of this season's that again. That is so cool. It's a video. Love Casual Friday, love Elisa's voice and soft approach to talking about current news stories and stuff that's kind of circulating in the internet, and we weigh in on it and have opinions. I tend to be the boisterous buffoon. I try to make a joke here and there, but it's a lot of fun. A lot of people love Casual Friday. We had a huge turnout for last Casual Friday's live show. You'll be able to watch it on Facebook and YouTube. Hopefully we'll have the audio stream fixed by then. We're working on that this Friday. And as a result, you'll be able to even listen to it. But hope you can join us, because we'll take your questions live. We'll take your comments just like we do here on Facebook and YouTube now. And you can chime in. I know Elisa's been working all month on this next show this Friday. So please join us. And if you can't join us, there's always the replay. You can always watch these videos later on Facebook and YouTube, or you can come to the website and download the podcast or any of the top podcast apps like Apple Podcasts and Stitcher and iHeartMedia, blah, 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 blah. So, yes, another episode of Casual Friday will be in the books, and hopefully you can join us live. I rode my motorcycle to work today, even though there's a slight threat of rain, because the new bike is so much faster with the modifications I've made. And so I'm going to get my work done here again today and do what I have to do, and then get on that bike and take a ride before the rain comes. But okay, that's it. We're off the air tomorrow, but we will be here Friday for Casual Friday. So please join us and share the show. We'll see you not tomorrow, but Friday.